But, I mean, in all seriousness, I wanted someone to close this conference that could give us an historical perspective, and also someone who has been cancelled or they've attempted to cancel him. And I couldn't really think of anyone better than Dr. David Starkey, who I really don't think needs any further introduction. I'm sure that you've seen him on TV interviews. I'm sure you've seen his television programs that he made. And I have to say, brought history to life by living it through the characters. And I thought they were excellent programs. I just wish there were more of them to come. So please put your hands together for Dr. David Starkey.
I'm afraid this is a very kind of Nigel Farage remark. I need this because I had a very good lunch, right? Thank you. I was cancelled. I survived. I was listening very carefully to the two previous speakers. And the key element, ladies and gentlemen, is in you. It's simply called courage. It is the most unfashionable of virtues. Once upon a time, we were a country built on it. If you don't believe me, go and look in Westminster Abbey for political courage, and go and look in St. Paul's for physical courage. Why did we win the wars against France? We won them because courage, heroism, was deliberately encouraged. The very concept of the hero, and by the way, it takes a German to say this. There's a wonderful article by my friend, Professor Ronald Asch, on the invention of the idea of the hero in 18th century England. When Nelson dies on the deck of Victory, exclaiming, "I've done my duty," effectively. He was not unique, not particularly rare. He was only the very greatest of a type. Do you know, from 1794 onwards, Parliament set up a special fund to honour reckless courage. Boys 25, 26. My favourite example is a chap called Richard Faulkner. He did two extraordinary things. He led an assault on a French fort. It's always the French, of course. And isn't it appropriate, as woke is essentially French? All bad ideas are French. It is a term of absolute and certain definition. Anyway, this is the physical attack on France. He led an attack on a French fort, the Fort Saint-Louis on Martinique. They scrambled up this thing with their bare hands and bamboo ladders. He was shot and should, of course, have been killed by a grape shot, but by an extraordinary coincidence, it hit his cartouche, his cartridge box, which didn't explode. It shattered, continued, captured the fort. He comes down. He's immediately gazetted captain. He's lieutenant. He's immediately gazetted captain. And as he comes down, what does the band play? From Judas Maccabeus. Think what's going on in Israel. The book of Maccabees are the warrior kings of Egypt. From the great oratorio, Judas Maccabeus, written when? 1746, to celebrate Culloden. We believed in winning battles in those days, not apologizing from them. He's hailed with the great, "See the conquering hero comes, sound the trumpets, beat the drums." And then the following year, this lad, now of course a captain, he's got his own frigate, and he captures a full French man of war by the simple expedient of catching hold of one of the cables of the man of war, lashing it to his capstan and locking the stern of his ship, where all his guns are, on the broadside of the French ship, and of course taking it out. He's killed. And therefore, you can go into St. Paul's, you see this magnificent statue, of course, rather improbably naked for an 18th century gentleman, but for an artfully disposed bit of chiffon hanging down and victory crowning him and falling back into the arms of Neptune. That's when we believed in courage. We have lost it, dare I say, and any woman here can sort of take me by the neck. We've elevated female virtues. Woke is primarily female. Woke is essentially, remember, a version, a parody of the Magnificat. He has cast down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree. It's the worship of the victim. We need desperately to reject, I'm sorry, so much, there's a great fashion now, I'm here to tell hard truths. There's a great fashion that we can reconstruct our politics, the whole of Nat Con and whatever, is on an attempt at doing so through Christianity. It will not work. Our civilization depends essentially on the recreation of the warrior virtues, the mental warrior virtues, the struggling virtues of Greece and Rome. It's why it starts, not at the beginning, not with St. Augustine. It's why it starts with the Renaissance and that rediscovery of the proper intellectual and physical virtues of the Roman world. Now, where does that connect to us, to our circumstances now? I heard Nigel, after he too had talked of courage, which of course he's displayed in abundance in his own career, with a little degree of rashness, like me, with a bit of humour and a bit of alcohol, and fundamentally naughtiness, the essential boyish quality of naughtiness, of daring not to say the same thing, that desperate desire to do something rude in church. And seriously, it is this. Remember, all progress is heresy. All progress is dissent. It's doing something different. What there is an attempt at imposing on us, and I came up with the phrase when I was still writing for The Critic, get a Chinese virus, finish with the Chinese society. The point about China, the point about ancient Egypt is they were fossilized societies that continue for hundreds, or in the case of Egypt, thousands of years, essentially just doing the same thing. And the terrifying point about China is, do you know when the moment of fossilization comes? We haven't talked about it enough. It's when it becomes a bureaucracy. It's under the Ming Empire when you invent the Mandarinate. And that greatest of conservative prime ministers, Benjamin Disraeli, understands that completely and passionately opposes the Northcote Trevelyan reforms. But it is no accident that the thing that has fundamentally gone wrong is that since the Second World War, we became a bureaucracy. We replaced parliamentary limited government with bureaucratic rule. And every profession, every body, body in the sense of institution, has been taken over by a bureaucratic structure. And woke grows in bureaucracy as its natural element. It is like a fungus in this damp turpitude of bureaucracy. It grows, it flourishes, it penetrates everywhere. So what am I really saying is, we need to understand, if we just look at the terrible crisis of our politics. Again, I was very interested, I am fond of Nigel. But Nigel, of course, represents that great misturn in English politics. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. Brexit was simply a waste of time. No, we can now see it is a waste of time. I voted for it. I campaigned for it. I believe in it. But sorry, Jesus was right about one thing. Know them by their fruits. What has it delivered? Nothing. Because the real issue was not Europe. The thing that destroyed parliamentary sovereignty is at home. And we need to understand this. Parliament, the mother of parliaments, has virtually no power. Do we all comprehend this? Every important decision is taken by a quangoid bureaucratic body. Monetary policy, interest rates are set by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. The absolutely key issue of climate change is determined by a scandalous quasi-independent committee, half of whose members and its late chairman absolutely up to their necks in investment in the green economy. English nature controls effectively town planning. This extraordinary fact that Boris, thank God, bearing in mind his flirtation with this stuff, stopped from building what he wants by newts. The disgrace, of course, of an effective an extraordinary veto because of the emission of nitrates, which completely overrides any other form of planning control through English nature. And what you do, you put fanatics in the charge of these things. Somebody like Tony Juniper is a fanatic, and a Conservative government has put him in charge. But what is wrong with all of them? By the way, every single area you look at, students now, there's a special office for students. The whole of media is dealt with by Ofcom, which includes this extraordinary woman who was exposed, even if she had been, by the Guido Fawkes website as a passionate supporter of Black Lives Matter. What do they all have in common? They are single-issue committees. As we learned, or if only we had learned, from COVID, the worst possible form of government is a single-issue expert committee. This is the rule of Plato. It's the rule of the expert. The great Greek thinker is, of course, Aristotle. And Aristotle is although he's, of course, a great philosopher, is very doubtful about the role of the expert in politics. And he has this wonderful line, which I always used to make sure my students actually understood. The judge of a meal is not the cook, the expert, but the eater. Politics is about, or should be about, the consumer. And ladies and gentlemen, until 60 or 70 years ago, we pioneered a political structure which enabled that to happen. And what we have done systematically, both on left and right, is to destroy that structure. So when Nigel says we need new ideas, I say we don't need new ideas. We need to go back to old and proved ones. We had something very similar to the terrible events that we've been through in the last few decades in the 17th century, when we had a revolution. We are, can I remind you, the only country in the world that has ever self-reversed a revolution. Hence the need for the article on Cromwell in the book on monarchs. There we are. But what we did in 1660 is an extraordinary process. When the French Revolution was reversed, it was the result of military defeat. When the horrors of Nazism and the horrors of fascism were reversed, it was the result of military defeat. And I don't count minor powers like Spain a long time afterwards. There is this extraordinary fact that we pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And what did we go back to? Well, this is where the Freedom Association comes in. You call yourselves liberal. The word liberal divides absolutely like the Red Sea in two completely different ways. And what we need to start to understand is good liberalism and bad, poisonous, destructive liberalism. The good liberalism is the liberalism which you, in your better moments, when you elevate Magna Carta, the rule of law, the life, liberty, and what everybody has forgotten, property, the catastrophic, again, Nigel was talking about this, the difference between capitalism and corporatism. It depends upon a proper attitude to property. We have lost that. And where do these go back to? Where does the idea of the rule of law, where does the idea of open justice, where does the idea of representative government, where does the idea of elections come from? They do not come from the abstract. They do not come from the Enlightenment. They do not come from progress. They do not come from the 18th century. They come from deep in our past. They come from the Middle Ages. Now, this is, of course, to stand the conventional way in which we understand history absolutely on its head. The Victorians, of course, understood this fact. Why do you suppose that when the Palace of Westminster burnt down in 1834, it was regarded as being a little providential? They just carried out that extraordinary transformation of the ancient constitution with the first Parliamentary Reform Act in 1832. The actual rules for rebuilding it specify it has to be in the Gothic or the Tudor. You will find Gothic in Canada. You will find a form of Gothic in Australia. You will find Gothic in Budapest. For the simple reason, these countries are all saying we are not a creation of a moment in time, a written constitution. We're not a creation of novelty. Our freedom is a birthright. It is something that is entrenched in us. Now, the bad kind of freedom, I'm afraid, and it was fascinating listening to the sense of paradox of the case officer of the SFU saying with visible horror, I've actually got to use, was it the equality? It's not. It's the human rights legislation, is it? But he's got to use the chapter protecting belief in human rights legislation. This is entirely alien to English law. The notion of universal human rights is a preposterous absurdity. They cannot exist. They're wonderfully described by Jeremy Bentham, the greatest legislative theorist in English history, as nonsense on stilts. And what is clear, ladies and gentlemen, is human rights have been used to drive a coach and horse through our freedoms. We all need to start understanding the enemy. The enemy is the enemy as it was understood by Edmund Burke at the time of the French Revolution. It's the notion that inherited structures are bad and newly fangled products of mere abstract reason are good. The liberalism, the new liberalism, the liberalism of Paine, and I'm afraid the liberalism of Jefferson. I mean, think about it. Has there ever been a sillier statement than that all men are born free and equal? Would any woman here tell me what a born man looks like? I shan't cite Augustine. It's a little vulgar before we've had a drink. But you all know that human beings are born, how can I put this as politely as possible, amid solid and liquid excrement, which is absolutely right. The notion, freedom is not a birthright in the sense of you're born with it. Freedom is an achievement. It's an achievement of a culture and of an individual. We must start to learn that. Of course, Disraeli understands it completely. He talks, and again we need to rediscover this sense after the horrible, formless conservatism light of the last 15 years. We need to discover it. Disraeli absolutely wedded to that notion of a parliamentary constitution, but he says something interesting. Disraeli is a conservative. He's not at this point a Tory. What he says is, we are a progressive country. This is the Conservative Prime Minister in his greatest speech, by the way, which took 2 hours and involved the consumption of 2 bottles of brandy. They did things differently in those days, and they had a degree of robustness which we all lack. Disraeli says, we are a conservative country. Sorry, we are a progressive country. Therefore, there will be change. The question is how it's brought about. Is it brought about in a fashion which is compatible with the inherited traditions of a country? Or do you use the abstract general rules of liberalism? If the latter, it's a disaster. And because I'm a historian, I believe in producing evidence. The catastrophe that we are now facing, and what will be the absolute obvious open goal if we had a Conservative Prime Minister with any sense of politics as well as anything else, is our disasters go back directly to the most outrageous example of changing the English Constitution according to the abstract principles of universal liberalism, that is to say, the new Labour government. Everything that we inherit now goes back absolutely directly to them. Why can we not understand it? Why can we not resolve to change it? It is simply, for me, there's no mystery about what's happened. The rocketing of immigration, the deliberate attack on the notion of native Britishness, the attack on the idea of the nation state, the undermining of the deliberate undermining of the union, the creation of the Independent Bank of England, the catastrophe of the importation of foreign law with the European Convention on Human Rights, the destruction of the central office of the English state, the position of Lord Chancellor. Why are we looking at the chaos and dysfunction of justice now? Because the office of Lord Chancellor, would Derry Irving, Labour, would Mackay of Clashfern, Conservative, have tolerated the notion that we have to let people out of prison because we don't have enough room for them? This spectacular maladministration goes back directly to that. Until we recognise what happened, until we recognise what we've got to do about it, until we recognise, finally, that the good liberalism, its central idea was exactly what you're about. It was the idea of freedom as a free society, as free individuals, as free political institutions, as freedom of property. It was the central feature of England, along with that other essential feature of England and Englishness, individuality and eccentricity. And that would be my trinity: freedom, individuality, and eccentricity. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming along here today. We have packed a lot in a short period of time. All of this has been recorded, and it will go out on our YouTube channel, where we hope that we can promote the association, because we can't put on events like this, I'm afraid, without money. As someone who once decided they were going to grab another free drink said, well, you are the Freedom Association, but I reminded them the freedom wasn't free. It has to be paid for. And I see a number of patrons of the association and members here today, and we are certainly looking for more patrons and more members and more people who will allow us to put on events, not only here in London. Our longest serving, I believe, council member, Dr. Charles Hanson, was here earlier today. He lives in Wetherall near Carlisle. He's 88 years old and still came down to this conference, because that's how committed he is. I think he should go. You'll see it on the video, because I promised. I didn't promise to mention it, I'll get embarrassed, but I think it needs a mention. So people have travelled far and wide to get here, which, I think even one of our patrons has flown in from Belfast. So thank you all for coming. If you're not a member, then what's stopping you? Go to our website, tfa.net, and you can become a member, or you become a patron, or you can make an additional donation. And as I say, we would like to put events on in different parts of the country, and we are planning one actually in the Midlands next year, to save people having to travel to London all the time. Just before I do finish, I really just want to thank every speaker who has spoken today, because I think everyone, to use this modern expression, which I don't really like, but I'm going to use it, has brought something to the party. Everyone has been different. Everyone has explored a different angle. And I would just like to thank every single one of them. My special thanks goes to our chairman, David Campbell-Bannerman, and also, I think, even more so to a degree, but David's put a lot of work in. But since he retired, Our treasurer, Tim Scott, has been putting the hours in getting this conference together as well. And he was at the back and now he's there. It's these lights you can't see. Please give Tim a round of applause. So I hope you've all enjoyed yourself, and I hope that we can see you again at another event soon. Thank you.